I grew up in the suburbs of Cleveland. And for those of you who don't know, that was kind of like growing up on the Upper West Side. Not all that different. I think at that time, Cleveland had the most concentrated Jewish population in the world. I don't know if it still does today, but I pretty much lived in a very Jewish environment growing up. And as a kid, and certainly as I became more aware that I was a lesbian, the concept of how to reconcile my Judaism, which was something that was so important to me and so ingrained in me from my family and in my beliefs, and the fact that I was gay was a very, hard would be an understatement. At that time seemed to be an impossible thing to do. And I can't tell you the number of hours I spent in high school and in college in my bed at night kind of thinking about what I was going to do. How was I going to have a Jewish family? That's what I wanted to have. How was I going to do that, given the fact that I knew somewhere in my heart of hearts that I was gay? So if you had told me back then that one day I would be sitting here at JTS, having gotten an honorary degree, being an out litigation partner at Paul Weiss, being married with my wife Rachel Levine in a Jewish ceremony and the mother of a son, and that I had won this case in the Supreme Court of the United States, I would have told you, I'm going to say the nicer version, that you were more than a little mashugana. Now, of course, the answer to that is what you heard Chancellor Eisen talk about today in his beautiful remarks, and very much, I think, what this movement is all about. The concept of change within limits, the concept of change in a way that is loyal to and respectful of our great tradition. In the Supreme Court, when I argued the case, I actually expressed that concept, I think, and I used, let me back up. So when you argue in the Supreme Court, particularly in a case like this, you know that the vote that really counts, often the tie vote, is Justice Kennedy's vote. So what most lawyers do is they spend a lot of time thinking about how best to persuade Justice Kennedy. And literally almost every word in the brief, you sit there and you think, is this going to appeal to Justice Kennedy or not? And you rewrite it in a way that you think will appeal to Justice Kennedy. And then when I was preparing for argument, another thing that we did is it would be a little obvious for me. At the very beginning of the argument, Justice Ginsburg said something like, as Justice Kennedy said to her colleagues. But it would be a little obvious, a little chutzpah for me to say that as a lawyer arguing. So one of the things that we did is we took a list of what we called Justice Kennedy's greatest hits. There's some of his most beautiful language in his opinions. And we wrote them out on 2 pieces of paper. And I literally walked through the streets of D.C. through Passover, because it was the holiday of Passover, saying them out loud to myself. So they would be on the tip of my lips when I spoke. And probably the most famous expression or phrase that Justice Kennedy has ever written, at least to date, we'll see what happens in June, is this phrase called "times can blind." In his famous decision in Lawrence in 2003, in which he held that it was no longer okay to make it criminal to be gay, which is what that case was about, in explaining how the world had changed and how the Supreme Court was overturning a decision, the Bowers v. Hardwick case of only a few years before, his explanation was that times can blind. And times can blind us to certain truths that seemed so obvious today and didn't seem obvious before. And of course, that's the answer, and that's what's happened in my own life. I can't tell you how lucky I am to be able to be alive in a time when that has happened. I can't tell you how honored I am to be here. Justice Kennedy's opinion in Windsor actually uses the word dignity something like 10 times in 23 pages. And what he's saying, I think, over and over again, and he wants it to be clear, is that gay people, like anyone else, have dignity, and that dignity is equal to the dignity of anyone else. And of course, that wasn't a foreign concept to me, because that's what our tradition teaches. I recently did a debate in DC against a pretty right-wing group called the Alliance Defending Freedom. And during that debate, I got a lot of the typical arguments, but one of the arguments I got was what I expected, the religious argument from the other side, and the argument that we can't give gay people equal dignity under the law, because that may offend some people in America's religious views. It was incredibly important, and everyone affiliated with this organization should be so proud of this. It was incredibly important when we filed our brief to the court that we had a brief from the Jewish Theological Seminary saying that that was not the religious views of everyone who's religious in this country, that there are religious people in this country who take the opposite view, and that they weren't just out there, excuse the expression, gay religious groups, they were mainstream religious groups. It wasn't just CBST, it was the Jewish Theological Seminary. And I believe to this day, that brief had a huge impact on the justices. I think it spoke to them. I think it helped them understand the issues, and it helped a justice like Justice Kennedy, who is, after all, a religious man, understand these issues. So when I got, in this recent debate I had in DC, when I got this argument about, well, we can't let gay people be equal under the law because it may offend the views of certain religious people, I came back to him with the words of my rabbi, Rabbi Jan Urbach, who'd written an op-ed in the Washington Post. And this is what I said to him. I had a cheat sheet with me, and I read her words to him, and I said that my support of marriage equality is an expression of my faith. It arises from fundamental principles found in the Hebrew Bible, in the rabbinic tradition, among them, that each human being is made in the divine image, that affording full dignity to every person is a religious obligation, and that we are commanded to pursue justice. It arises from the biblical injunction that no person should be alone and that everyone should have a life partner. I have to tell you, this debate that I did was in the main building of the Daughters of the American Revolution in DC. And I probably was the first Kaplan who ever debated there. And it wasn't exactly a friendly audience. But when I said those words written by Rabbi Urbach to that crowd, there was silence. No one had an answer, no one could respond, and that really is the greatness of our tradition. That really is what we were all taught and what I've been taught, and it's such an incredible, unspeakable honor for me to be here to say this. I wish to be here today. I wish my grandmother could be here to see this, but thank you so much for this great honor. Thank you.